Good morning. I first just want to take a moment to share how blessed and honored and humbled I feel, and moved, obviously, by that wonderful presentation, both of the wonderful presentations this morning. I'm going to modify my remarks and actually keep them quite short. It's very difficult to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement as a white woman, far beyond my capability to really express what Black Americans are feeling in our country right now. Just yesterday, we had another police-involved shooting. This time it was a Black American man who walked up to a Black female police officer who was in a police vehicle in the Bronx. After a 4th of July celebration, this man walked up to the vehicle and shot her and killed her, and was subsequently shot by the police officers that were responding. So the cycle of violence rages on in the US. And it may be a bit beyond the scope of the conversation that we're having today to talk about the fullness of the Black Lives Matter movement right now. I think that the speakers that you've already heard from expressed very clearly how important it is that the Maori voice is centered in any conversations about changing cannabis policy in this country and the implications for concerns about problematic substance use. And what I would like to touch on a little bit as well is economic equality and equity and the implications of legalizing, regulating cannabis in that context. And I'm actually going to talk about the Native American experience in the US and add just a little bit to Kylie's comments about the US Native American experience. So in the US, there are 5.2 million indigenous people referred to by our federal government as American Indians and Alaskan Natives. 5.2 million represents 1.7% of our population. This is an invisible population in America. And I apologize, I need to put my glasses back on to read my own writing. The Native populations have some of the highest rates of substance use and mental health disorders, and of course are some of the most underserved populations by public health practitioners. Most disturbing is the suicide rates among Native American populations in the United States. Among the cohort of 15 to 34-year-olds, they are 2.5 times more likely to commit suicide than whites in America, with 31 per 100,000 people versus 12.2 versus the white population. Native Americans are admitted to prison in the United States at 4 times the rate of white people. And what many of us don't know is that Native Americans are killed by police officers at almost the same rates as Black Americans. In Washington state, there are 29 federally recognized tribes. And as Kylie indicated, one of the main different features of Native American populations in the United States is that, of course, our federal government isolated them, relocated them from their historical lands, and put them on reservations. And since that has happened, there has been very stunted economic development, as you can imagine, on these reservations. These are not pieces of land that are desirable or in particularly promising areas for development of commerce. As of April of this year, there were actually 4 Native American tribes in the state of Washington that had entered into compacts with the state government in Washington to open cannabis stores, most of them. I don't believe we have any producers yet in the state, but we do have 4 different tribes that have entered into the commercial market. They do not impose the same state cannabis excise tax that is imposed outside of the reservations, but they are imposing their own tax that flows to the tribe that is equivalent to the excise tax that is imposed outside of the reservations, and that tax is only imposed on non-native people that purchase from the stores on the reservations. Native Americans do not have to pay that tax. So I just want to flag 3 different considerations that could be helpful for the conversation that we'll have later. First, the experience that we had during the campaign to pass Initiative Measure 502 in reaching out to Native American communities was that we needed to acknowledge the significant tensions around this issue. You've already heard about some of those yesterday, that these are communities that are already struggling with elevated levels of substance use disorder and mental health issues, and there is a very significant concern that legalization and regulation of cannabis leads to normalization of its use and complicates the efforts to try to combat those increased risk factors in the lives of their young people. At the same time, at least in Washington state, the Native American reservation lands were also being infiltrated by international criminal organizations that were growing cannabis on historical tribal hunting and fishing lands. We, in Washington state, the experience that we were having was that there were families of organizations that were coming down from British Columbia and would tend to rent properties in Western Washington to grow cannabis inside those properties. But in Eastern Washington, where the Yakima tribe and other tribes, Colville tribe are, we would see criminal organizations coming up from Mexico and growing outdoors on their tribal lands. And of course, these organizations were dumping fertilizers, pesticides, all of the negative environmental consequences that flow with illicit outdoor crops onto these lands. And so there is that tension there that potentially moving towards regulation of this marketplace could reduce those harms, but at the same time, when we're not investing in these communities and helping them grow strong, healthy children and have healthy communities, it's a very complicated question. So I wanted to flag that and share that experience from Washington State. There's also another tension that is true not only for Native American populations, but we heard more of this as well from Black American populations with whom we engaged, is that it's all well and good that you want to end this illicit marketplace and end the arrest of people who are engaged in the illicit cannabis marketplace. But when you do that, you're also ending a source of income that has been one of the most profitable sources of income for our communities, which is, of course, an indictment of the economic opportunities that we provide those communities. But nevertheless, what happens when the young Black man who is able to buy his own clothes and put food on his own table and maybe take care of a child that he's fathered with another woman no longer has that income because it's been taken away from him and given to a licensed store, an employee predominantly owned by white people, right? And in Seattle, Washington, we actually had a case, and continue to have a case of a community that is predominantly Black in downtown, close to downtown Seattle, protesting at the site of a retail store that is opened in that community that is owned and operated by a white man, and they want to know why this person is coming into their community and benefiting from selling cannabis in their community. Their argument is not that, and taking away the jobs that we used to have on our street corners, but we don't want you here benefiting off of our communities through your business. And so that finally takes me to the third point that I want to flag, is that when we were developing Initiative 502 and engaging in the rulemaking process after its passage, for the American Civil Liberties Union, the organization that I represented in doing this work, one of our motivating goals was to craft a policy that would deliver the benefits of legalization and regulation of cannabis to those communities that had been disproportionately impacted by cannabis prohibition. Part of that you can see through how we dedicated the tax revenues to basic health, prevention, treatment, education. But we weren't able to, because of the restrictions of Washington state law, we weren't able to provide increased opportunity for people from those communities to get the licenses, right, to run the stores. We weren't able to discriminate in favor of those communities in developing this economic opportunity. And to the extent that there are ways that that can be done, it is something to consider. Now, it is sort of a strategy that is fraught with sort of a cop-out in a way, that by somehow favoring these communities with economic opportunities, you're somehow giving them something that they want, right? As Kylie pointed out, this might not be the right economic opportunity for us. And so ultimately, in developing a policy that you want to address the inequities in our societies, you have to think very broadly and deeply about, what do reparations look like? What do community reparations look like? And is there a way to fashion a regulatory policy around cannabis that actually starts to provide those reparations to the communities that have been disproportionately impacted by prohibition? And I think in order to do that, you have to start, of course, with the conversations with the people who have been impacted and find out, what would it look like to you if we were able to shape this policy in a way that would lift your communities up? And that's all that I have. Thank you.